Vendors are making us believe that AI agents will replace half of entry-level jobs, that is here to stay, and that will automate pretty much any task in a white-collar role. In today's episode, we'll talk about the top skills for working with AI agents and unpack how much truth there really is to these claims. So let's jump right in. Welcome to What's the Buzz, where leaders share how they have turned hype into outcome. Today, we'll talk about the top skills for working with AI agents. And who better to talk about it than someone who's actively working and thinking about that? John Thompson. Hey, John, thank you so much for joining.
Hey, Andreas, nice to see you. How are you doing today?
Doing very well. Hey, I'm so excited to have you on the show. I've been following your content on LinkedIn for a number of years. So I'm really thankful that you're making time for me and making time for us.
Yeah, as we said in the pre-show, I've followed your content for a long time, and when I got the invitation, I was really excited. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Fantastic. Look, for those of our guests in the audience who don't know you yet, maybe you can share a little bit about yourself, who you are and what you do.
Sure. John Thompson. I'm the Senior Vice President and Principal at the Hackett Group, and my job there is to set up a Gen AI services practice and help build out the Gen AI products. Previous to that, I was the Global Head of AI at EY. Previous to that, I was the Global Head of AI and Advanced Analytics at the second largest biopharmaceutical company called 𝗪𝗲𝗪𝗀𝗀. Before that, I was at Dell and IBM and a few other companies. And at the same time, I've written, you can see over my shoulder, I've written 5 books about data, AI, and analytics. And I'm a professor at the University of Michigan as well.
Wonderful. So, hey, you've been in the industry for quite some time. You've seen it from many different angles. This will be a really good and meaty conversation. I'm super excited. Folks, if you're just joining the stream, drop a comment in the chat where you're joining us from. I'm always curious to see how global our audience is. And also, don't forget to pick up your copy of the AI Leadership Handbook so you can learn how you can turn technology hype into business outcomes. Now, with that out of the way, why don't we jump straight to the questions that we talked about for today's episode. There's so much hype and so much buzz in the market, and it's been there for the last 9 months probably, around the topic of AI agents, agentic AI. We can delegate goals to software now all of a sudden, and they will work on all these magical things that we have been working on ourselves before, and they will give us predictions and recommendations. They can also implement actions. And while that sounds all very nice and very lofty in terms of goals, I think there's also a very tangible aspect to it, and that is what happens when you actually introduce that kind of AI into a workplace. What changes, if anything? So I'm curious, what are you seeing in your conversations with businesses and with leaders? What changes?
You know, there is a lot of buzz and a lot of hype around Gen AI and large language models and large reasoning models and AI agents, and they're all intertwined. You know, some people say, oh, you know, I want to talk about agents only. I don't want to talk about Gen AI. And I said, well, you really can't do that. You know, they're intertwined, you know, they're the same. And I mean, we've had agents for a long time. We've had agents for maybe 40 years or something like that. But, you know, those are symbolic, you know, they're not neural network, but they're symbolic driven rules based agents. So agents are not new. We've had them for quite some time. But what changes with AI agents is that AI agents can do anything a person can do. You know, if you think about a Gen AI driven agent, you can have them do pretty much anything. They can spend money, they can book airfares, they can book hotels, they can fire people, they can hire people. You know, we've all seen those missteps. You know, I think the Canadian Airlines is probably the most famous one, where, you know, they were putting out tickets for like 79 cents or something like that. And the airline, to their credit, honored all of those. So the thing is that a lot can change. What has to change? Not much, really, because you can build an agent and you can control that agent in a much more fine-grained way than you can control an employee. You know, so if you're building an agent, I always tell people, don't anthropomorphize models. You know, don't use pronouns like he and she and talk to them as if they're John or Andreas. You know, they're just models. They don't think, they don't have emotions. But if you think about what a model can do, it's helpful to think of a model as a proxy for a person. So anything a person can do, a model can do. So the breadth of change is either nothing to everything.
I love that. And I must say, I'm in the same camp or of the same opinion that we shouldn't anthropomorphize systems and call them Iva or Eva or something else, John or Andreas, because it doesn't mirror what they can do. They're still based on data. They're still working with probabilities and making predictions. But I find a lot of times now that we talk about agents in these systems that can take over more complex tasks that we've been doing so far, I a lot of times find that these analogies to how would you manage a team of people actually work quite well. Or what are parts of the tasks that you are doing that we could now delegate, or that you would now delegate to an agent? What do you think about that? How far can we actually compare humans in the way we work in an organization with how AI is now working?
Yeah, I think the one thing that's in a parallel path or very close to what we're talking about here is then all the buzz in the last week. Apple put out their paper, Does AI Really Think? And I've been very vocal about this for the last 3 years, and the AI does not think.
Right.
AI infers. It infers on steroids. It can infer billions and billions of times a second, but it's not thinking. It's clearly not doing that. So if we look, there's a great deal of conversation about the crisis of AI. Is it going to take all the entry-level jobs? You mentioned it in the intro, and 𝗕𝗨𝗭𝗭 of Anthropic, stirred the pot a couple weeks ago by going on a big forum and saying nobody's going to hire any kids out of college anymore, which that's not true. That's not the case. I think what we're getting confused here is that many people are looking at what AI does now, and they're saying, oh, they're taking over the entry-level jobs. That's not true. What AI does is it does a good job, as you said moments ago, of predicting what is the next letter, the next word, the next frame, the next concept, the next paragraph, whatever it is. So if you're a person or an employee that just does rote tasks, A, B, C, that kind of thing, well, your job is at least roles, parts of your job is going to be automated away. But if you're a higher level thinker, someone who's doing creative work in synthesizing different parts of information and coming up with original thoughts and adding value to the organization, you have no worries. AI doesn't do that. AI is nowhere near that. So what AI will take over is the very low level, mechanistic, repeatable kind of work. That's gone. So if you have a role and half of your role is mechanistic and half of your role is creative, stop doing that part and fill out your whole job with the roles over here.
Now, this is a pretty big change to some extent, right? On one hand, we've always had this technological change where things have been automated that we've done before. That's the whole premise of software to begin with. Mm-hmm. But it feels like there's a sense of urgency on one hand. There's an order of magnitude that seems to be a lot bigger than what we've seen from previous waves of innovation. And so not all leaders are comfortable with this change, right? First of all, their employees, their team members are not comfortable. If you read the news and the headlines, whether it's the entry-level roles or if you say that has some ripple effects and goes up the hierarchy, what's the role of a professional? What's the role of an expert? What's the role of a leader? You see these CEO memos from Shopify, from Duolingo. We want to be AI first. We're not hiring new people unless and until we can do that with AI. There's a lot of angst and confusion and fear there. So how do you see leaders becoming more comfortable with this situation and also helping their team members go through that transformation? What are the skills that leaders need in this new environment?
Great question, Andreas. And I see it all the time. We've seen it with Klarna and Shopify and all these different companies. We're AI first, and I talk to many companies. I think I'm over 500 companies over the last 3 years that I've spoken with. And some companies have said, look, we all have to, managers have said, not companies, managers have said, when I go to hire a new person, I have to justify why I'm going to hire this person and I can't do it with AI. Fair, I get it. But the VP, SVP, EVP, C-level executives need to understand that you can't really just turn these things off. It's more, you can migrate to it. You still need to hire people. You still need to do your jobs. You still need to build the technology. We're not there yet where large language models, and the whole debate over the last week about large LRMs, large resource models, or large reasoning models, sorry, talking about, hey, these things are going to take over thinking positions. It's not the case. Again, I'll say it over and over again. Large reasoning models do not think. They do not reason. They infer at a high rate. So you just can't say, hey, I'm not going to hire any more people. We're going to do it all with AI. What you can do is say, we're going to look at some of the more mechanistic roles. We're going to automate those. We're going to hire different people. Maybe you don't hire the same profile you did before. Maybe you hire a different profile, but you're still going to hire people. You're still going to bring people into the business. You're still going to grow them, and you're going to augment them with AI. So to answer your question directly, I think that leaders at the top of the organizations, at the top of the pyramid, need to have a more nuanced view of this. It's not an on or off question. It's more of a, here's a continuum. We want to take AI this far. We're going to still hire people over here. But where we were hiring people that had no knowledge of our skills or no knowledge of our industry, we're going to need people with a little bit more nuanced understanding and subtle understanding of what we do. So I don't think it's going to turn things on or off. I think it's going to change them materially.
That deeply resonates with, honestly, how I'm thinking about this too, right? I'm visualizing this as a sliding window, basically, from where you're further to the left, more basic research, gathering information, gathering data. If we talk about entry-level roles, now that shifts further to the right, you have software that does the legwork for you, but you're still in charge to ensure, is it complete? Is it accurate? Are there any areas and any aspects that we have not explored that, again, maybe AI can help us explore, or we should be exploring, synthesizing, and then working more on the decision proposal, as opposed to, can you get as much data as you can and put this together?
I think a really good example is David Solomon at Goldman. At the last World Economic Forum, the last Davos meeting, he got up in front of all the world leaders and said, hey, we generate all these different, documents for investment banking. I think it was like a prospectus or something like that. He said 95% of that can be done with AI. And that is true. A lot of it is gathering information from the SEC and getting information from the company and the market and competitors and Bloomberg and different places, and putting it all together in a predetermined form that everybody understands very well. And then the last 5% of the process is you bring in experts who review it. Now that's exactly how all these processes are going to work. If it's all about just gathering and collating and stacking up information, AI can do that all day long.
Now, that brings up another question, and to me that is, we've talked so much about automation for the last 10, 15 years, right? Obviously, we've had rule-based automation for a very, very long time. Then we said, well, there are some automations between different systems, log in here, download a vendor invoice, save it locally, extract information, put it into your ERP, and then kick off the process. So things like robotic process automation. Are we now talking about agents as an RPA 2.0 or 3.0? Or is it a big fundamental shift in how we work?
Andreas, you're the first person that's put it that way, and I love it, because I've been positioning it that way for about 1.5 years now, is that, when people ask me about automation, the first thing I say to them is, how are you thinking about automation? Are you thinking about automation in the old line RPA way, which a lot of people do? And I say, well, you could do it that way, but that's, A to B, C to D, X to Y, never changes. It's always the same. So I say, you really should think about this as an agentic workflow, which is then very dynamic. Okay, well, the conditions are so much so that this really shouldn't go to the governance department. This should go to the legal department. Or, the velocity of change is such that you really need to talk to someone who's managing the plants, because we're seeing the demand signals ramp up significantly, but our production signals, our production plan is not changing. So automation from an AI perspective can be very dynamic and very interesting and very exciting, and, sensing what's going on in the world. As you said earlier, in RPA, A to B, C to D, it's just, it just runs, it doesn't change. Automation from a Gen AI and an AI perspective can be really exciting and dynamic. The automation conversation really needs to be grounded in a context of, what are you expecting automation to do for you?
I like that part. First of all, that we're throwing each other the ball back and forth on this, but the part specifically around where you said, well, making a decision. Should this go to route A, to route B, to route C, in using AI to make that decision, right? We've used machine learning for a while to make decisions. For example, is this an expense that can be approved easily because it's below a certain threshold, or it's in a neutral or category or something, or does this actually need a person to review this? Now we're taking this steps further by saying, based on the information we have and all these different input factors, which route is the optimal one to make a decision. So great to hear that from you as well. Now, when we do that, aren't we outsourcing a lot of our thinking to AI? There've been some recent studies about this. What do we actually retain? What's the role of us as team members, as team leaders, if we just say, hey, AI, agentic AI, whatever thing, agentic workflow, go figure this out for me. I want to think about this. Is it taking it too far?
No, and I don't think at this point with the technology, as we've talked about large reasoning models and the inability of LLMs to think, I don't think you can take it too far. I think it's really mechanistic the way that the AI that we have today works. It's great. It's fantastic. It does a lot of things, many things that we can't do. I mean, if you brought to me, let's say 25, 30-page legal documents and you said, compare them all and let us know where the privacy shortcomings are in all these documents, it would take me weeks and I would be very bad at it. AI could probably do that in, I don't know, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 6 seconds. I don't know. It depends on the model and the compute environment. So no, I don't think we're taking it too far. I think what we're doing is we're still feeling around in the dark, trying to understand what is the domain of computing, which we've always had to do, and what is the domain of humans? And once we have that, and in general, we understand it, but it's not a widespread understanding. Once we get that more clear and say, okay, these kind of comparative, exercises against large corpuses of information, definitely in the domain of computing. The idea of creativity and keeping things under control and making decisions with the vast context we have in our minds, definitely human. We just need to bring those together.
Do you see, or to what extent do you see people just more or less blindly or in good faith using AI and say, well, I let the thing do the grunt work for me. I don't need to think about this, and then it just sent this off, and we end up with AI slop?
Yeah, it's that's a great question and a great point. I've been feeling around in the dark myself, trying to figure out what is my next book, my 6th book, and it's actually going to be on how people need to be developing and refining their critical thinking in the age of AI, which is just what you described. It's one of those things that when you ask people to critically think, you can almost see them go blank. They're like, I don't even know what you're talking about. I think that's an indictment of our education system. We're not teaching people to critically think, and we need to do a better job on that.
It's difficult, right? Even before Gen AI, you could make the argument that critical thinking or the value of critical thinking has been diminishing. Throw social media in the mix and compartmentalizing, or living in your own social bubble. Now you add AI in when we're already not as critical thinkers anymore as we used to be.
That's true.
Right? That gets more difficult. One of the other questions that I keep pondering with experts in the industry is agentic AI so much different from how we've usually and traditionally used software? Are there even new skills that we need to learn, or is this just another conversation with a more capable chatbot, with a more capable assistant, and there's just a lot more, almost like an iceberg underneath the surface that we don't see as users, but I just ask it a question, it does the legwork for me and then comes back. Before I did have to do that. Where do you see this? Is it just another evolution on a continuum, or is it a revolutionary thing that we now need to train everybody on and change how they think about it, how they articulate their goals?
Another great question. I think, Andreas, we could be here for about 5 hours doing this, but we're going to run out of time. But I think I always get painted with the brush of being, a pessimist, and that's not true. I'm an AI optimist. I think we have, over the last 3 years, seen a step function. It's not a smooth evolution. It is definitely a step function in the capabilities of AI. But the way we're going to use it and spread it more widely across the world professionally, personally, educationally, academics, universities, research, is that we're going to understand that AI in this respect, what I'm talking about now, is no different than any other system, at least any other AI system we have built. It's all about the data. It's all about managing it correctly. It's all about integrating it. It's all about bringing an ensemble of data together in an intelligent way that allows AI to understand, analyze, and project from it. You know, what we've done over the last couple years, 3 years, is we've gone from using 10% of the world's information to 100+% of the world's information. That people have not got their head wrapped around. But once everybody, in at least in information management, understands that in systems and development and AI, we're going to have just a golden age of AI, in my opinion. You know, so is it different? Yes. Is it really different? No. I'm on both sides of that equation.
I like that. That's wonderful. So maybe then to bring it home and make it tangible for business leaders, again, maybe those that are not quite sure, is this real? How big of a thing is this actually? Where should I even start? Are my people using this? And do I even want them to use this? What's the one thing that they can implement or encourage the team to do today?
It's, I don't know. I think this is a great idea. I did it at EY and it worked out exceptionally well. Every organization, every company, no matter what size you are, you should build a safe, secure, private Gen AI environment. And you should let everybody use it for unfettered reasons. Let them write their weekend holiday agendas. Let them write sonnets to their puppies. Let them use it for anything. Because what happens is you raise the level of capability across your whole organization. Now, they're going to use it for work reasons too, of course. They're not going to waste a whole lot of your time and money. But you really should have every part of your organization using Gen AI in a safe, secure way. You really should. Don't wait. This is not a hallucination. This is a real transformation.
Wonderful. Great. And again, very actionable. And I've seen many large enterprises do that, in fact, make different models from different vendors available to their teams. And then it's up to the transformation team, transformation office to get people enabled and on board to rather use our safe and secure environment than some public version of whatever assistant where we don't know what's happening with our corporate data and so on. Great point. Now, we're getting close to the end of the show, John, and I was wondering if you can summarize the key 3 takeaways for our audience today of how can you build the top skills for working with AI and agents?
First and foremost, you should have some part of your technical team spending their time learning Anthropic's Model Context Protocol and Google's A-to-A protocol, because that's how agents are going to talk to each other. MCP is going to be, at the low level. A-to-A is going to be across multi-vendor, multi-agent. So you should have your teams learning that now. They're going to need it. It's like a 101 skill. They have to have it. So get them learning that now. Secondly, if you're concerned about AI and you're reticent about it and you're worried about moving forward, you got to get past that. You need to talk to Andreas or me or whoever on your team or whatever consultant you want to bring in to make you feel comfortable. But now's the time. Every day that you wait, the further behind you fall. And then lastly, as I said, everything, I implied this, but I'll be explicit. You really need to build environments that are safe and secure. And it's not hard to do. It's quite easy to do. The one thing that non-technical people need to understand is that Gen AI and models and all these different kinds of agents and chatbots and all this kind of stuff are easily knitted together. You and I, Andreas, have been doing this for decades. You remember when it was really difficult to get 2 systems to talk to each other. It was nigh on impossible. Now you put a model repository together, you drop in Claude one day, you drop in GPT another day, you drop in Cohere's model. Anybody can point at any model and use it. That's just, it's wild. It's great. The tech has really enabled us to do some great things. So build stuff that your people can use and let them go in an unfettered way, but make sure it's safe.
Wonderful. I love that. That really brings us home. So John, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your experience with us. I really appreciated the conversation.
Thanks. I've really enjoyed it. Hopefully we'll do it again soon.
Yeah, that'd be great. So folks, for those of you in the audience, thank you for joining us as well, and see you next time for another episode of What's the Buzz. Bye-bye.